Hey listeners, Britt Malazzo back with Bellefonte Area School District. Thanks for tuning into our latest podcast. If you're familiar with our podcast, you may see we're obviously doing things a little bit differently, and I will apologize in advance if there are any technical difficulties. We do have a backup system in place as well. Usually we're set up in my office. This time, of course, with school closed, we're practicing distancing and not able to physically get together to do this. But thanks to technology like services like Zoom, we can make it happen. Anyway, today with me is John Gazar, the school board president, who is also chairman of the committee, created to help oversee the elementary project in addition to school board president. And we're here just to talk about, where that stands. It's been a huge topic in school and the community, and I just plan to do several podcasts to update everybody about this, as it's something that really affects all taxpayers of the district. Especially now that the district and board has kind of restarted with this process. Hopefully John has some of that information about where it stands, committee, which will oversee this, and of course how the state-ordered school closure will affect things. So John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Britt, and good morning.
Yes, absolutely. I kind of have a fun fact for you. If you don't know, you're actually my first guest who has made it on the podcast for two separate topics. Do you remember what the other one was?
BAMs in space, I believe.
Yeah, you got it. I was just thinking back, wondering, usually we have different guests all the time, and I'm thinking, man, John Gazar's been on it for something else. So again, welcome back. I just want to go back and talk a little bit about the history of this project. It seems like the board has done a lot of work, especially the last school year. There were even public meetings set up where members of the community can provide input, and now it seems like things are kind of going back to square one. I guess why, for lack of a better term, restart this process and take us through that a little bit.
Okay, sure. Well, excuse me, looking back, we really are, I think it's perceived as a restart, but in some ways it's really a continuation. So what we did before was we held, I think, 3 public listening meetings throughout the district in different locations. And the idea of that initial meeting with the public was just that, listening, to hear their concerns about elementary education within our district. And we did get a little more into more questions and answers, but it was really designed to be just listening to the pulse of the community to see what they wanted to do or what they felt was important with the elementary program. So I think those meetings were successful in that we reached a lot of people, especially through your Facebook Live. We were getting up in the hundreds in attendance. But it really was, overall, it was a small cross-section of the overall district, so we were a little concerned about that. But nevertheless, Mr. Steiner he was the chair of the facilities committee then, and they did a lot of good work, sort of aggregate, bringing all that data together and trying to make sense of the number of times the same concern was brought up, putting out some answers to particular questions that were repeated over and over in that process. And now we are at the stage where the district has acquired or entered into contract with a new firm called Hunt Engineers and Architects. And the purpose of their contract now is to we've gotten to the 10-yard line. We need to get past that last 10 yards and over the goal line with a decision on a path forward for the district. And what I mean by that is, are we going to renovate 4 buildings, elementary buildings? Are we going to renovate 1 or 2 and combine 1 or 2? There are a lot of options that we need to consider. And even though we had a lot of data from previous facility studies, we never really had the data in a usable form that looked at all the potential savings, the pros and cons of different options, et cetera. So that's how we came to be under contract with the current firm that's doing the work.
Sure, and I really appreciate you also clearing up, I use the term restart. I think I said, for lack of a better term, it is a continuation, so I appreciate you kind of clearing up maybe that misconception or what people might think. Now in February, Hunt Engineers was retained to do a study of the elementary buildings, and I believe they did that March 12th and 13th. That was just before the state gave us an order to temporarily close due to the coronavirus outbreak. It wasn't a unanimous decision, but why overall, from a board perspective, why go with Hunt?
Why go with Hunt as opposed to other firms, or why go with Hunt in at all?
I think in both cases there were a couple of firms also.
Well, so it was important that we had an architect in the running. We were down to 2 architects previously in the elementary project, and there were some complications in that. Some things started to get, without getting too far into the weeds, let's just say that the process needed to be halted for a multitude of reasons, and so we did that as a board. And then after a brief pause, we decided it was time to restart that process. But really, I think the overriding thing there was, rather than hire an architect that was going to be drafting plans, we really needed someone that was going to separate out the piece of what is the elementary program even going to look like. So it was really hard for us to compare apples and apples across multiple architectural firms as far as what they were proposing, when we didn't even know the direction that the district was going to be headed with our elementary program. So that was probably the biggest factor in rejecting all bids at the last go around and starting that process over, which we're not into that portion of it yet. So we rejected all bids, come back to the thinking table there, the round table, and decided it was probably best just to hire a firm specifically to get us through this decision of what is the path forward. And then once we have that as a community, then we'll go back out and resolicit bids for an architectural firm to actually design what we want. But in the past go around, we didn't really know what we wanted or what the community would support.
Okay. Yeah, it's good to know. I think when a lot of people hear things like architect and engineers, they kind of assume that there's a plan already in place and that, perhaps Hunt is doing something other than what they're hired to do. Can you clear up any of those misconceptions and talk a little bit about what Hunt specifically was hired to do for this phase?
Sure. So they were hired to simply get us through a decision of what makes the most sense for the district in the elementary program. Will we be, again, as I said, renovating 4 buildings? Will we be doing some combination of renovation on 1 or 2 and combining 1 or 2 buildings? But their job is really to bring in the community piece to this and help us reach out to the community and really get a good feel for where we see elementary education going in our district. So they will not be designing any portion of the program. They're just here to help us build enough data, let the data lead us to the facts, and let the facts lead us to a decision on a path forward. And in fact, their contract specifically exempts them from participating in the design bidding process once we move forward. So we felt it was necessary to isolate this firm from the next phase of the process, so there wasn't they couldn't recommend proprietary things that would give them an advantage in the next phase.
Okay. Yeah, thanks again for clearing that up too. Now there was a committee established to help oversee things. Talk a little bit about the goals and the mission of that, and also who that includes. You are obviously the chairman of that, so we got the right person here on the podcast.
Okay, sure. So the committee is really, one of our goals is to support Hunt in their contract and be a liaison between them and the district and the community. But so we have 4 members of the board that are on that committee. We have 4 members from the administrative team that are on that committee. We have 8. Our goal was 8. I think we ended up with 9 members of the community, and those could be, PTO members, active teachers, and other people within the individual communities. So we wanted a good cross section from Marion Walker, from Benner, from Pleasant Gap, from Bellefonte Elementary. So we have representatives from each of those areas so they can bring forth concerns about their building, concerns about their educational space needs and the functionality of the building, as well as being outspoken in their particular communities so we get a good feedback from the community itself. And then we also have 3 members, I think it is, from the community at large. And those are members that have either participated in the past or who are on planning commissions and in townships and things like that, so they can help get the word out. So we have that representation as well. We did have our first meeting, I believe it was last week, as a committee, and it was a good meeting. It was just an initial meeting to review some of the preliminary results of the assessment that Hunt did of the buildings and getting an idea of some of those needs. But it was also sort of an organizational meeting for the committee itself to answer any questions about formalities and a path forward and what their role is, et cetera. So we're well underway in that process, and we're looking forward. We're very thankful we have people from the different communities that are stepping up to be on that committee. And we're looking forward to continuing the work of the previous facility committee that Mr. Steiner had chaired.
Sure. Do you guys plan to meet regularly as well, despite this closure?
Yes, we'll be meeting virtually, just like everyone else in the world right now. And the meetings will be somewhat timed around the progress that Hunt makes. So again, as I say, our role is somewhat supportive to Hunt and where they are in that process. So right now, for example, they've done their initial assessment, and they've come up with a description of the current conditions of the building. And then they present that to the committee. The committee is able to ask any questions that they need, so they have the information to take back to their individual communities. Excuse me. That's not COVID, by the way. So they can take that information back to their communities and just be a liaison between the district, the community, and the engineer that's helping us get through this process. So then next they're reviewing educational space needs. They actually did have a meeting with the principals, and I'm sure that maybe you can have them in a podcast to describe that process a little better. But it's well underway. There's a lot of meetings happening in the background, and we're really looking forward to the first public meeting, whatever that's going to look like. We don't know if it's going to be virtual or if we'll be through this and having actual public meetings. But the community input, the community tolerance for a particular option, whatever that might be, that's really where we need that information. We need to find out. We need the participation. So to anyone listening to this, please get that word out. And we're really looking forward to everyone getting their voice heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we did that in kind of the last go around. There were those listening meetings that got a lot of feedback, and I think the public really appreciated, knowing that they were a part of that subject, especially in something that affects everybody in the community. We talk so much about it's our elementary buildings, but it really affects every taxpayer as well with that. I think in the past, I believe the board has said that there was also hopes to have a decision of one of these options for the elementary project in June. Is that still the case, or is the timeline now kind of shifted a little bit because of this closure and how things are working out?
Great question. I don't know that I have the answer to that, other than to say that, yes, originally we were hoping to have some real good direction and maybe even a decision by late May or early June. And a lot of that was timed around the school calendar. We know that people typically are disappearing on vacation and hard to have those kind of meetings over the summer. So that was the original intent. How long does this continue? I don't know. So I think overall, we are working very hard to try to figure out acceptable ways to still meet that goal. But again, some of that is going to be the tolerance of the community for this type of a format or setting. If we feel that we're getting a good pulse from the community and we can continue, absolutely, we want to do that. But if we feel that there's just some resistance to that, we cannot go forward with this project without huge community support and buy-in to the idea.
Sure, absolutely. And you really bring up a great point too, as things are continuing to change. I know, on the district end and things, you work on as well. There's so much information, so much things changing. So just to reassure our community, we do appreciate the patience and support as we continue to bring you this information, and appreciate the patience and support in working with us as we try and get all that information out as it is changing. Sometimes it seems like it is daily. So John, I completely understand, but did want to ask that question question as well. Is there anything else I'm missing that's really important for our listeners to know right now, either about the committee or about the project or where you guys stand, that I haven't asked?
I think that pretty well covers it. The main idea to all of this is we really need the feedback of the community. We need them to be involved, and there will be lots of avenues to provide feedback. I know, I believe, Britt, you're going to have regular updates on our webpage under the elementary project tab. So we're hoping that we can have feedback forms there even for this podcast. If you watch it and have a comment, hopefully there'll be a link right below that. You can submit your comment right there to that particular podcast. That's the big thing. Get the word out. We're continuing on with the process. We're hopeful the community is supportive of that idea in this ever-changing time. And just let us know where you stand. Please participate.
Yeah, well, thanks, John, again for joining me. Always appreciate it. We work together a lot. It seems like I said before, as you're becoming a regular now. So it is always a pleasure. And of course, for our listeners, like John said, I will do my best to keep these podcasts going so you can hear information directly from the people involved. There's really nothing better than listening to that information, except from those who are kind of on the front lines of the project and all the topics we talk about. If you want more information as well, there's an elementary building project link on the district's website. That's www.basd.net. Remember the net, it's not org, it's not com. Now I'm fumbling my words, John.
That's okay.
.basd.net. You can find that on a computer to the right of the page or by scrolling to the bottom of a page if you're using a mobile device. We will also continue to blast out that information on social media as well. So come follow us. We got Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, where we try to put out all that information in addition to just about everything going on at the district, period. So John, thanks again so much.
Thank you, Britt, and thank everyone who will be listening and hopefully participating.